Good morning. As I've met with Canadian workers and labour unions across the country, I've heard the same thing over and over again. After working hard their whole career, people should be able to look forward to financial security in retirement. Canadian workers who've paid into a pension plan on every paycheck should be able to rely on it actually being there when they retire. After years of showing up each day and investing in your career, your family, and your community, you need to know that your pension will be there for you. Il est tout à fait normal que les travailleurs qui contribuent à un régime de pension en profitent à leur retraite. Après des années à travailler, vous devez pouvoir compter sur votre régime de pension. But far too often, we've seen workers, through no fault of their own, forced to take big cuts to their pension when the company they worked for goes bankrupt. This needs to change. Canadian workers deserve better. It's time for the government to stand up for workers and secure Canadians' pensions. That's why Canada's Conservatives will change the law so that when a company goes bankrupt or is being restructured, workers will be protected. We will prevent executives from paying themselves large bonuses while managing a company going through restructuring if the pension isn't properly funded. It's that simple. C'est le temps que le gouvernement pense aux travailleurs et aux pensions. C'est pourquoi un gouvernement conservateur va modifier la loi à cet effet. Si une entreprise fait faillite ou est restructurée, ce sont les travailleurs qui méritent la protection, pas l'élite dirigeante. On va traiter les travailleurs et les pensionnés en priorité. C'est certain, on va empêcher les dirigeants de se donner des primes quand l'entreprise qu'ils gèrent est restructurée, surtout si le fonds de pension n'est pas bien financé. Executives shouldn't be getting massive bonuses while workers lose out in their retirement. Our plan will also require companies to be more transparent by clearly reporting the funding status of their pension plans. Canada's Conservatives have a plan to stand up for workers and get the economy back on track. Together, we can secure the future. Les conservateurs ont un plan pour agir pour les travailleurs et remettre l'économie sur les rails. Ensemble, on va agir pour l'avenir. And before I take questions, I would like to make a statement with respect to the Prime Minister's ongoing misleading campaign on healthcare and his attacks on provinces. A Prime Minister who was serious about healthcare wouldn't have called an election during a national health emergency. And now, unbelievably, he's threatening to cut healthcare funding and close health clinics in the middle of a pandemic. I knew Justin Trudeau was desperate to win his majority, but I never believed he would compromise people's health to get it. I support the health system we have right now, where Canadians can choose the kind of health care they want, universal and free for everyone. That's why Canada's Conservatives will make record-high transfers to the provinces to ensure every Canadian can benefit from free, high-quality health care where they're free to choose what's best for them. Our system is the pride of Canada and one of the best in the world. It's the same system that has existed for every one of Justin Trudeau's years as Prime Minister, where the private role in health care has grown under his watch. I view innovation as a good thing. I trust the premiers to do what is best for patients in their provinces. If Saskatchewan, Alberta, Ontario, or Quebec want to innovate to provide better health care, I support that. Why? Because it gives Canadians more choice. The more choices Canadians have in health care, the better. It reduces wait times, and it frees up more money to reinvest in health care. My view is consistent with the belief that Ottawa shouldn't be dictating to Quebec, Ontario, Saskatchewan, or any other province. It should be working with them, not threatening them. So I support the current system, but here is where I draw the line. Healthcare must be free for every Canadian. No one can ever be left behind. And all personal health decisions should be made by patients and their doctors, not insurance companies or anyone else. Un premier ministre qui prend le système de santé au sérieux n'aurait pas déclenché une élection pendant une urgence sanitaire nationale. Et maintenant, de façon tout à fait incroyable, il menace de réduire le financement de la santé et de fermer des cliniques en pleine d'une pandémie. Je savais que Justin Trudeau veut désespérément gagner une majorité, mais je n'aurais jamais cru qu'il serait prêt à compromettre la santé de la population pour y arriver. Je soutiens le système que nous avons en ce moment, où les Canadiens peuvent choisir le type de soins de santé qu'ils veulent, universel et gratuit pour tous. C'est pourquoi les conservateurs du Canada vont offrir des transferts records aux provinces pour assurer que tous les Canadiens peuvent bénéficier de soins de santé gratuits et de qualité et choisir ceux qui leur conviennent le mieux. Notre système fait la fierté du Canada, un des meilleurs au monde. C'est ce même système qui existe depuis le premier jour où Justin Trudeau est devenu Premier ministre. Le rôle du secteur privé dans la santé a augmenté sous Justin Trudeau. L'innovation est une bonne chose et je fais confiance aux premiers ministres provinciaux pour qu'ils agissent pour le mieux pour les patients de leur province. La Saskatchewan, l'Alberta, l'Ontario et le Québec veulent innover pour offrir des meilleurs soins. Je suis d'accord. Pourquoi? Parce que ça donne plus de choix aux Canadiens. Plus les Canadiens ont de choix en matière de santé, mieux c'est. Ça réduit les temps d'attente et ça libère des fonds qui peuvent être réinvestis dans la santé. Mon point de vue respecte la conviction qu'Ottawa ne devrait pas dire quoi faire au Québec, à l'Ontario, à la Saskatchewan ou à toute autre province. Ottawa devrait travailler avec les provinces, pas les menacer. Je soutiens le système actuel, mais c'est là qu'il fait être clair. Les soins de santé doivent être gratuits pour tous les Canadiens. Personne ne peut être oublié. Et toutes les décisions personnelles sont prises par les patients et leurs médecins, pas par les compagnies d'assurance ou qui que ce soit d'autres. Je vous remercie. Thank you very much.
We will now be taking questions. Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions. Première question.
Sur l'Afghanistan, M. O'Toole, Boris Proulx du journal Le Devoir. En 2001, l'Afghanistan représentait une menace pour le Canada. C'est pourquoi nous sommes allés en guerre. 2021, la menace semble au même niveau. Je voulais savoir, Erin O'Toole, Premier ministre, entraînera-t-il le Canada dans une nouvelle guerre s'il y a de telles conditions?
On doit aider les Afghans sur le terrain maintenant, après la guerre là-bas. C'est important pour le Canada de travailler avec nos alliés sur la sécurité mondiale et pour se tenir debout pour nos valeurs. Et c'est pourquoi, après la guerre, on doit assister les Afghans qui sont en danger à cause de leur aide pour notre pays, pour nos soldats, pour nos bénévoles sur le terrain. Et c'est pourquoi je suis déçu par l'inaction de Justin Trudeau.
Est-ce que Erin O'Toole, le premier ministre, serait un faucon, c'est-à-dire un premier ministre qui souhaite aller mettre des bottes sur le terrain, aller en guerre, ou serait-il plus dans l'ordre des sanctions contre l'Afghanistan, comme ce qui semble être suggéré par les pays du G7 aujourd'hui, quoi qu'on n'a pas les détails là?
On doit travailler avec nos alliés proches, les États-Unis, bien sûr, mais les 5 UE, sur la situation en Afghanistan. La situation là-bas est très, très triste. Et c'est totalement inacceptable que les traducteurs et les autres personnes sont là sans une option d'être ici au Canada. Il y a des gens en risque, en danger, à cause de leur travail avec nos soldats, avec nos armées. Et il y a 5 ans, j'ai demandé un plan pour les traducteurs, pour les gens sur le terrain. Comme Premier ministre, je vais toujours travailler avec nos alliés sur la scène internationale. Et comme un ancien combattant, comme un ancien homme d'affaires, je vais être une voix forte sur la scène internationale pour nos intérêts.
Prochaine question.
Oui, bonjour, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Monsieur O'Toole, avec votre annonce d'aujourd'hui et d'hier sur les travailleurs, quels électeurs est-ce que vous ciblez avec ces promesses? Est-ce que ce sont de nouveaux électeurs pour le Parti conservateur?
On doit attirer des nouveaux électeurs dans l'élection, bien sûr. Et c'est pourquoi je suis en train de parler sur mon plan pour le rétablissement du Canada. Et on doit avoir une relance économique dans chaque secteur de notre économie et dans toutes les régions de notre pays. Nous sommes le seul parti avec un plan. Et je vais travailler avec les syndicats, avec les organisations à but non lucratif pour améliorer la situation pour les familles canadiennes, pour les familles québécoises dans les régions. Et j'ai eu des excellentes conversations avec les syndicats au Québec, comme Métélaus et les autres, et à travers le pays. On doit travailler ensemble pour une reprise économique après la pandémie. I want to attract more people to the Conservative Party and our plan to get Canada back on its feet. That's why we have Canada's Recovery Plan. And I'll partner with unions, with nonprofit organizations to get this country working again in all sectors of the economy and in all regions of the country. And I'll partner with folks to help the well-being of families after COVID-19. We have to work together, and our plan, Canada's Recovery Plan, is a plan of action, and I invite more people to read it and help us get the country back on track.
Puis, pour bien comprendre votre position sur les soins de santé, est-ce qu'un gouvernement conservateur imposerait des restrictions aux provinces là, sur les soins de santé qu'elles auraient envie de privatiser ou en tout cas pour lesquels ils auraient envie d'ouvrir une place au privé? Est-ce que vous imposeriez des restrictions aux provinces?
Je vais toujours respecter les champs des compétences des provinces et je vais augmenter les transferts en santé par un autre 60 milliards de dollars. Et j'ai un plan clair sur la santé des Canadiens et je vais avoir un fédéralisme de partenariat, pas un paternalisme de M. Trudeau. Est-ce que le Premier ministre va couper les transferts en santé pour le Québec ou les autres provinces? C'est totalement inacceptable en pleine d'une pandémie pour le Premier ministre de continuer son campagne de division des actes mauvais contre les intérêts des Canadiens. Je suis un rassembleur et je vais travailler avec les premiers ministres pour le bien-être de leurs citoyens. I will work with the premiers as a partner for the well-being of their citizens. I have a plan that has been very transparent about giving an extra $60 billion to our public universal health care system. Mr. Trudeau has launched a campaign in the fourth wave of a pandemic, and almost every day he has tried to divide people, mislead people, manipulate media, and now pick fights with the provinces when we should be working together to fight the fourth wave. So I think it's time for a federalism of partnership, not of division. And so I'm inviting more Canadians to look at our plan, Canada's Recovery Plan, look at our once-in-a-generation investment that we're planning to make in our healthcare system, our public healthcare system. And I think the more Canadians get to see our plan, we can put the division and the approach of Mr. Trudeau behind us.
Next question.
Chris Reynolds, Canadian Press. The Conservatives are planning to reverse the federal ban on the Ruger Mini 14 that was used to kill 14 women at École Polytechnique in Montreal in 1989. Why are you making this promise?
Well, in terms of the rise in domestic violence and in the rise of hate crimes during the pandemic, we've actually been talking about tackling that. That's one of the shadow pandemics in the COVID-19 pandemic has been feminicides in Quebec, a rise in domestic violence. So we want to tackle those challenges, and it's in our Canada's recovery plan. We also don't want to mislead or divide Canadians when it comes to public safety. That has been Mr. Trudeau's approach, trying to divide people who hunt or sports shoot from Canadians that don't. We have a very effective screening, training, and licensing system in Canada for people who follow the law and obey the rules to be able to hunt. It's a tradition in Canada, and I want to make sure public safety is at the forefront, so we will fix the smuggling problem at our border. We will work with law enforcement on the criminal spread of illegal firearms. We'll concentrate our resources really where they need to go to keep Canadians safe, not try and mislead and divide people as Mr. Trudeau has.
In your press release today, the party targets so-called corporate elites and makes a pledge to prioritize pensioners when bankruptcy proceedings are underway. And just yesterday, you promised union representation on big companies' boards. This position stands somewhat in contrast to that of the government you were a part of under former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, which, for example, cut the corporate tax rate from 22 to 15%, where it still sits. So, specifically, are you willing to consider raising the corporate tax rate?
Well, I'm glad you highlighted some of the policies we're putting out for working Canadians and for union representation on boards of directors and to secure the pensions for people who may risk losing their pension if their company goes bankrupt. These are issues that I've been working on for several years to try and make sure we stand up for working people, to give them a seat at the table. And after COVID-19, I want to secure jobs. I want to see wages go up. I want to tackle the cost of living crisis and the housing crisis. In our plan, in Canada's recovery plan, we have many policies focused at fighting the cost of living crisis we have. But I want working families to know our plan has a seat at the table for organized labor to help us get this economy back on track. And Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Singh, and the other parties don't want all sectors of the economy to have a recovery. I want all workers to have steady work, rising incomes, and that's why we want our economic recovery to be in all sectors and in all regions. And I want working Canadians to have a seat at the table and a champion in a Conservative government. Les travailleurs canadiens méritent une voix sur la colline ici à Ottawa. Et c'est pourquoi, dans notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada, on va donner une chaise à la table des décisions des entreprises à charte fédérale pour les travailleurs. Aujourd'hui, je viens d'annoncer une protection pour les pensions pour les travailleurs dans une situation où leur entreprise va faire faillite, par exemple. On doit avoir les politiques pour le bien-être des familles canadiennes, pour le bien-être des travailleurs. Et les conservateurs, nous sommes le seul parti avec un plan pour une relance économique dans chaque secteur de notre économie et dans toutes les régions. Et on doit agir pour nos travailleurs.
Next question.
Good morning. Janice McGregor from CBC News. You've spoken in the past about how you feel there's the Conservatives on one hand and all the other parties lumped in together on the other, but reading your platform language on pensions, it actually seems to be borrowed from positions that the New Democrats have taken on this very issue to protect workers' rights in the past. So I'm wondering why you're moving your party's position in that direction in this election and what feedback you've had from the business community, the investment community, about this kind of shift.
Well, it's not a shift for me, Janice. I had a private member's bill on protecting pensions in bankruptcy several years ago because I represent auto workers. My dad worked at General Motors. In some of my first meetings were with people worried about their retirement, worried about losing their pensions. And so I've been talking about this for many years. If you work hard, you need to have a government that has your back in restructurings. I've also worked on restructurings as a lawyer, and so I've put forward thoughtful, smart policies to protect workers and our economy. And as leader of the Conservative Party, I've put forward Canada's Recovery Plan to stand up for all Canadian families, not picking and choosing which sectors of the economy deserve a recovery, like Mr. Singh and Mr. Trudeau. I want everyone to get back on their feet. I want to see us tackle the cost of living crisis, and I do want to address some of the social costs of the pandemic on addictions, on mental health. So we have a very detailed plan, but I want working families to know I've been in your corner before, and as Prime Minister, I will be in your corner to make sure your family does well following COVID. Les pensions pour les travailleurs sont un enjeu important pour moi personnellement. Mon père a travaillé avec General Motors à Sainte-Thérèse et à Oshawa, et les travailleurs méritent un plan pour la protection de leur pension. Et j'ai eu un projet de loi privé il y a 4 ans sur ça comme un député. C'est une priorité pour moi et je vais toujours lutter pour les intérêts des travailleurs canadiens et leurs familles. Et pas comme l'NPD et les libéraux, nous sommes ici pour tous les secteurs de notre économie et toutes les régions. Tous les Canadiens méritent une relance économique.
You've spoken about how businesses are going to drive economic recovery from this pandemic in this country, and yet this is the second day in a row when you're out highlighting platform planks that are quite business skeptic. I'm wondering what happened to the true blue Conservative Erin O'Toole.
Well, I'm wearing some blue today. Our first major policy, or one of the first major policies we announced, was our job surge. We want to get this country working. We want to actually help people get back to work as we wind down programs that are causing some sectors to have a shortage of labor. We want to help highly affected sectors of our economy like travel, tourism, hospitality, areas of our economy where we have a higher incidence of women entrepreneurs that have been affected by this pandemic. I want to see a private sector-led recovery, as I say many times, in all sectors and in all regions, including natural resources. We have exciting innovation technology and intellectual property policy with patent boxes and flow-through shares. I want to make sure that everyone recovers, though. So I do have provisions to make sure working families and workers and their organizations have a seat at the table, have a role in some of the prioritization of infrastructure. I want to make sure all Canadian families do better after this difficult year and a half for our country. On doit avoir une relance économique, comme j'ai dit, dans tous les secteurs de notre économie et dans toutes les régions. Et j'aimerais voir une relance économique dans le secteur privé, et c'est pourquoi on a déjà annoncé les politiques sur l'innovation pour les secteurs les plus touchés par la pandémie, incluant l'hôtellerie, les restaurants, le secteur touristique. On doit avoir une relance économique dans le secteur privé, tout en respectant les travailleurs et leurs intérêts. C'est pourquoi on a des politiques pour les entreprises et les PME, mais aussi pour les travailleurs. C'est important pour moi, le bien-être de toutes les familles canadiennes, Canadiens et Canadiennes après la pandémie.
Next question.
Mr. O'Toole, Michael Couture from Global National. During the pandemic, for-profit long-term care homes were seen to have higher rates of COVID-19 outbreaks, and some studies said that they actually had inferior care. So why did your party vote against the idea of prohibiting for-profit long-term care?
Our healthcare system, its strength is its public basis and its universal coverage. We need to make sure we reinforce our public healthcare system, which is why on the second day of this election campaign, I launched Canada's Recovery Plan, which has a minimum 6% increase in healthcare transfers every year in a way that's stable, predictable, and without conditions. We all want to tackle the gaps that we're exposed in the pandemic. Making sure long-term care, our healthcare system, our fatigue, frontline nurses, doctors, technicians, all get relief. That's why we're giving the provinces $60 billion over the next decade to help build up our system after the pandemic, fix gaps, and improve the situation and response in long-term care. The fourth pillar of Canada's recovery plan also makes sure we will never again be unprepared for a crisis. We will have domestic capacity for critical medicines, vaccines, and equipment so that we're not caught off guard as we were in the early stage of this pandemic. We will respect the provincial jurisdiction in these areas and be a predictable partner as opposed to Mr. Trudeau, who in an election he called in a pandemic is dividing people, is being caught misleading people, and is now trying to divide province versus the federal government. That's not how I'll be as Prime Minister. I will try and have collaboration and partnership at the center of improving lives of Canadians.
With all due respect, you didn't answer my question, so you can do so in the follow-up if you'd like, about voting against prohibiting long-term care, but also as a follow-up, on page 150 of your platform, you promised to, quote, encourage partnerships with private nonprofits or nonprofit long-term care homes. How would you do that?
We need to improve the response and the quality of life in all long-term care homes in Canada. And as the provinces look at improving long-term care, whether public or private, we need more resources, more funds, and we don't need Ottawa dictating to other provinces that they're so far removed from. How would Mr. Trudeau know what works best in Quebec or in Ontario? We need the federal government to be a partner, and that's why in Canada's recovery plan, we've locked in and guaranteed $60 billion in new money over the next decade, an historic level of investment that will allow us to tackle improvements in long-term care, will also allow us to provide more choice, lower wait times for Canadians, and anywhere we can partner with the provinces to improve the health care and the well-being of their citizens, I will be there as a partner.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. The Liberals announced a large number of housing-related policies this morning. They claim it will lead to more housing construction than your plan. What's your response?
Mr. Trudeau's had 6 years and has failed. The housing crisis has exploded in the last 3-4 years under his leadership. He has had programs that have been ineffective in terms of affordable housing, in terms of programs for first-time homebuyers. That's why in Canada's recovery plan, I put forward a detailed and serious plan to tackle the housing crisis. It will ban purchases by foreign investors who have no intention of living in Canada. It will accelerate the construction of 1 million new homes. It will free up federal lands and properties to work on supply. It will work on density. It will give first-time home buyers longer mortgage terms to have more certainty. We will work on the mortgage stress tests and other things to make sure there's access, and we will incentivize more purpose-built rental housing. We have a serious plan to tackle a serious crisis for our country, and after 6 years of inaction from Mr. Trudeau, more hollow words today is not what Canadians deserve. They deserve a plan, and we will deliver on our plan.
Just to follow up, I'd like to talk about... Oh, no, it's no problem. My colleague would like that in French.
On a un plan pour la crise du logement maintenant à travers le pays. Et M. Trudeau, il vient d'annoncer un plan après 6 ans d'inaction par le gouvernement. Nous sommes dans une crise à cause d'inaction de M. Trudeau. On va construire un autre million de maisons ici au Canada. On doit corriger la situation avec les hypothèques. On va avoir un banniment pour les achats par les investisseurs étrangers. On doit avoir les politiques claires pour lutter contre la crise du logement à travers le pays. C'est dans notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada. Et les Québécois, les Canadiens méritent un plan et un plan d'action.
Okay, follow-up. This morning you said that you would support provinces if they wanted to innovate on healthcare. As Prime Minister, what would you do if a province wanted to innovate by expanding private healthcare options?
Well, let me reiterate, I 100% support our public and universal healthcare system. I've long called it fundamental. It's paramount to the well-being. We should be very proud of our system and strive to improve it. That's why in Canada's Recovery Plan, the plan I launched on the second day of this campaign, we're guaranteeing increasing stable funding, $60 billion over the next decade to partner with the provinces to improve healthcare, improve long-term care, give relief to our front lines, get wait times down, partner with the provinces. And we have seen instances of innovation in the pandemic. The fact that the provinces use the pharmacies and those networks to deliver vaccines and to get faster, better service out by using those networks of pharmacies, always respecting universal free access, but accelerate and reducing the wait. That is the type of thing that we need to respect. And the federal government as a stable partner, we must be there to allow the provinces to innovate, to give more choice, and to make sure we get wait times down.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. There's a big difference between a public system paying for a vaccine and paying a private person to administer that vaccine, and for people to pay for a service and skip ahead of the line because they are able to pay. Can you please explain why you support the idea that in Saskatchewan, if you are able to pay $1,000, you can go to the top of the line to get an MRI and therefore get quicker access to whatever follow-up service, be it surgery or other treatment, because you have that early diagnosis?
I support universal access in our system, public and free. And I also support provinces making sure that they can offer more choice, faster service, and less waits for their citizens. All provinces, I know, want to have the best healthcare performance for their provinces. As the federal government, I will be a reliable partner with predictable, stable funding. I don't believe that the federal government should be cutting and taking away from the provinces at a time we're in a pandemic. We need as much choice, as much access as possible. The biggest thing we need to do is lock in guaranteed funding. In Canada's Recovery Plan, we have done that, a historic $60 billion investment over the next 10 years, and that will allow provinces to have a universal public system, to innovate, have more choice, and less wait. On doit travailler en étroite collaboration avec les provinces pour l'amélioration de leur système. On doit avoir plus de choix pour les patients dans un système public et universel. Et c'est pourquoi je vais donner un autre 60 milliards de dollars. Et j'ai beaucoup de confiance dans les premiers ministres et leur approche. Et on doit travailler avec de respect, et on doit encourager les provinces d'améliorer leur système, d'avoir une approche d'innovation, de réduire les attentes pour les patients. Après la pandémie, je vais augmenter les transferts et on doit travailler ensemble.
So from that answer, do I take that you support programs that allow people with the extra money to get faster service in healthcare?
I support public and universal service, choice, and getting wait times down. And what I will do with provinces is partner as a reliable funding partner. And if they're able to offer more choice, less wait, and provide innovation, as we saw with the deployment of vaccines through private pharmacy chains, that is what Canadians expect. Faster, better service, less wait times, but free access, universal. And I've always said that's paramount. And what is so disturbing is the Liberals, in an election they've called during a health crisis, are literally on a daily basis misleading people, trying to divide, trying to pick fights at a time they should be partnering with the province on Delta variant outbreaks, on critical medicine needs and other issues. I won't pick fights. I will pick partnerships and serving the interests with the Prime Minister or with the premiers. I know they have the best interests of their citizens at heart, and I find it very strange that the Prime Minister in an election wants to claim he's going to cut health care from provinces at a time we need more funding, which is what I'm offering.
This will be the last question. Ce sera la dernière question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. I've been following your campaign for more than a week now, and I've been watching the other leaders. I'm over here, by the way.
Hi there.
And one thing that's really concerning is that I haven't heard anything about the thousands of children, dead children, being found at residential schools. Nobody's talked about it. Why aren't you talking about it?
I've talked about it quite a bit during this campaign. I spoke about it in Saskatchewan. I spoke about it in Delta, BC when I was on the ground. We all have a role to play in reconciliation, and the horrific reminders of our past with the discovery at former residential school sites of graves in Kamloops and Cowassess in other parts of the country must have Canadians recommit to reconciliation. In our platform, we call for immediate move on calls to action 71 to 76, which deal specifically with former residential school sites. This is an issue that's important to me. I know all parties care. I want to be a Prime Minister that actually partners with First Nations to make real, steady, deliverable progress. And the calls to action are our roadmap, but we need to restore trust and accountability in the federal government when it comes to reconciliation.
You've been very clear on what's happening to the Uyghurs in China, saying it's genocide. I asked you a few months ago, you might not remember, but I was doing pool duty outside of West Block, and I asked you whether or not you feel what happened to Indigenous peoples with residential schools, with the 60s scoop, constitutes genocide. You didn't give me a clear answer. I don't like to ask yes or no questions, but do you believe what happened to Indigenous people here in Canada constitutes genocide?
I've said the entire residential school chapter of our history, which was long and horrible, represents a form of cultural genocide, meaning the system was set up to actually take the language, the culture, the identity from those young people, and it's horrific. There was a horrific abuse and maltreatment and deaths. It is a really horrific chapter in our history, and reconciliation is about trying to reconcile that bad past with today and going forward in the future. That's why reconciliation has to focus on intergenerational trauma that remains from that period of our history. And it's why this week in British Columbia, I announced an historic investment, $1 billion over 5 years for Indigenous mental health and addiction treatment, and to make sure that the treatment options are culturally appropriate, being led in partnership by thought leaders, knowledge keepers from Indigenous communities. I believe all Canadians have a role in reconciliation, and as Prime Minister, I will make sure it's core to our government.
It will.
Les pensionnats autochtones étaient un exemple d'un génocide culturel parce que c'était contre la culture, la langue autochtone des jeunes. C'était horrible. Et tous les Canadiens, les Québécois doivent travailler ensemble sur la rue de la réconciliation. C'est pourquoi on a des politiques dans notre plan sur les enfants disparus, les appels d'action 71 à 76. On doit travailler sur la intergenerational trauma avec les communautés autochtones. Et c'est pourquoi je viens d'annoncer un investissement historique d'$1 milliard pour la santé mentale des Autochtones et sur la toxicomanie dans les Premières Nations. Et on va livrer les traitements dans une approche sensible pour les Premières Nations. On doit travailler ensemble comme Canadiens sur la réconciliation.
It will be all for today. Ce sera tout pour aujourd'hui. Merci. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.